All right, AMP1 students, in this video we're going to continue talking about the organic macromolecules or biological macromolecules. So we talked about carbohydrates and lipids in the last video. So we're going to talk about proteins, nucleic acids, and ATP. So for the proteins, this is an image from the textbook that's showing, if you recall, any protein is composed of the building blocks called amino acids. And so this is just showing one amino acid. And I'm showing you this so you can see like what atoms make up an amino acid. So you have the carbon and the hydrogen and the oxygen. Remember, that's the three we had in carbohydrates and lipids too. But you'll notice that there's a nitrogen atom that's also associated with this amino acid. So those are the four atoms that you will always have if you're talking about a protein. So carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. And then we have different types of amino acids, like there's leucine and lysine and tryptophan, arginine. So this part here, the R is not really an atom per se, but it's just like representing all the possible combinations of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen that could be here making a certain amino acid. So that's what that's representing. Okay, so when it comes to the proteins, when it comes to their functions, they have kind of countless functions or roles within the body. They're the second most abundant molecule in the body, second to water. So they have numerous functions. So I'm just going to give you a few of those and some examples, but just realize that there's quite a bit more, but we kind of just want to focus on some that we're going to talk about through AMP2. So there's the atoms, and then actin and myosin are two examples of proteins that you should be familiar with. And I put those in there because you will learn a lot about what the role actin and myosin have in skeletal muscle contraction. So actin and myosin are two proteins within our body. Hemoglobin is another protein, and you may be familiar with this one. This is the protein that all the red blood cells contain. And when the oxygen, remember that, I don't know, may or may not know this, red blood cells carry oxygen from the lungs to the various cells of the body through the blood. So the only way they can do that is oxygen makes its way into the red blood cell and then binds to the hemoglobin. So hemoglobin is actually what's carrying the oxygen by red blood cells. So hemoglobin is a very important protein. And then antibodies, which I think a lot of people are familiar with, those little molecules that are going to fight off infection. So all the antibodies that we have in our body, there are actually proteins. And we have some hormones, just like we did for lipids. So we have some hormones that are proteins. So they're going to help with regulation. And then all of the enzymes, we haven't focused on enzymes yet, but we'll get into a lot more detail about them. But all of the enzymes, they're the ones that speed up or make chemical reactions happen in the body. All of them are proteins. So there's a lot of those. So these are based on our examples. They act in defense, which would be the antibodies. They cause movement, which would be the actin and myosin. They carry oxygen, which is the hemoglobin. And then they serve as, regulating body processes. And then enzymes, they're pretty much directing all the chemical reactions that are happening in the body. So you can't kind of overstate the importance of proteins in the body. They do quite a bit of functions in the body. So okay, so those were our proteins, and I'm going to slide down to the very last two of our objectives because they're about proteins. So since we're talking about proteins, we'll just kind of continue. So 29 here is to describe the four structural levels of proteins. So we will talk about how proteins form and what shape they have. And so I'm going to use a picture, but here in the little area here, I kind of described the different complexities of a protein. So there's 4 of them: primary, secondary, tertiary, and then quaternary. So, but let me go to the textbook and we'll go to the protein. Oh, I think it's on the next page. Let me scroll. Yeah. So we'll enlarge that. All right, so this is how, we'll talk about this too, but how proteins are, oops. There we go. The way the cell knows how to make a protein is based on the DNA in the nucleus. And so it'll have the little blueprint that shows the which amino acids are going to be bonded to which other amino acids and in what sequence those amino acids will be bonded. So the first time as the proteins are being made for the first time, they take on this linear shape. So here we got this like nice long chain of amino acids, kind of curls around there. But each one of those little balls, and they're different colors because they represent different amino acids. Each one of those little balls is an amino acid bound together by a peptide bond. So there's a little peptide bond, which is a covalent bond holding them together. But that's not the shape that the protein is going to remain in the human body. So after they get these long chains or linear sequence of amino acids all linked together, then what happens is the chain will fold along itself. And so it will, and remember that we talked about this when we talked about hydrogen bonds. It'll be hydrogen bonds that'll hold these different sections of this linear sequence of amino acids, with another segment of it. So, and it can do it in a couple of ways. And whenever it folds on itself, it might do it where you get like almost like something that's similar to DNA, kind of does this little alpha helix thing. And it's just based on, so this is our little linear sequence of amino acids. And then if they start to bond together, hydrogen bonding forming between them this way, they'll get this like little spiral kind of shape. But sometimes you'll have like a linear sequence of amino acids, and they'll just kind of fold on each other and then have hydrogen bonds this way too. So they call that the secondary structure when you get the alpha helix or beta sheet. That's what they call that. But they're not done yet. So once they're in this shape, then what happens is, so this section became an alpha helix, and then maybe this end is attached to this end, and then this part became a beta. So then if you get this kind of these repeating, there's a beta sheet and alpha helix, you get them all like kind of repeating these different secondary structures, then you get this 3-dimensional shape. So they call it a tertiary structure. So, and there's 2 different types, which I don't talk too much about, but so just as long as you know this contains these beta sheets and alpha helix sheets, and again it's like folding on itself. So now we got this like big kind of glob is what it looks like. So they call it globular, or sometimes it might be all the same, like this is all helical, so it might be fibrous too. So that's the tertiary, but we're not done yet, because then what these guys do, this globular protein or this fibrous protein, they go and find other tertiary protein structures, and then they bind through covalent bonding with them. So like here's one, they call it a polypeptide. So here's like one protein, tertiary protein structure. Here's a second one, here's a third one, here's a fourth one. And then they all come together and form covalent bonds with each other, and they become a whole protein. And this is the quaternary structure. So it contains 2 or more of the tertiary structures. And it will be the most common shape of proteins in the human body. And they have to be this particular shape. So this looks like hemoglobin. I don't know if it is, but it looks like hemoglobin, because hemoglobin has 4 polypeptides like this. And they'll have like a little hem group in the center with iron, and that's where the oxygen binds. So the hemoglobin, for example, or any protein in the body, it would have to maintain this shape in order for it to function. So if it was hemoglobin, it has to be this shape or it can't carry oxygen. It wouldn't be able to. And then it, so that whole form determines function that we talked about in chapter 1. So a body part or a molecule in the body has to be the right shape for it to carry out its function. So we have these proteins that are the same way. They have to maintain that shape so they can carry out their function. Okay, so back to our objectives. So we went over the levels of protein organization. And then the last objective is over the term denature or denaturation. And so we need to be familiar with that term because we'll use it and you'll hear it used quite a bit. And what it means is that it's referring to proteins in this case. So if a protein becomes denatured or we have denaturation of a protein, that means it loses its shape. So remember I said this hemoglobin molecule has to stay that shape or it can't carry oxygen. So if it gets denatured, it loses this shape. It doesn't have that shape anymore, and then it can't carry the oxygen. So we call that denature. And there's quite a few things that can cause a protein to denature, but the two that we want you guys to be familiar with is body temperature, so a really high body temperature or a really low body temperature. And the other thing is pH, so the hydrogen ion concentration in the body. So if there's like way too many hydrogen ions and the pH is really low, that will denature a protein. If there's not enough hydrogen ions in the body, that will increase the pH, and then the proteins can denature. So one big reason why we have those homeostatic control systems for pH and for body temperature is to make sure that our proteins stay the shape that they should be and they don't fail to function. And so proteins, because they're the second most numerous molecules in the body and they have so many roles in the body, if body temperature rises way too high or pH drops drastically, like almost every body process in the human body will be affected because they're all run by proteins, almost all of them. And so that's why it's so important to keep body temperature and pH where it needs to be, because if not, proteins get denatured, body processes stop, and we can die. And we don't want to do that. So, all right, so that's our information about the proteins. And it looks like I'm going to do one more video. It'll be a little bit shorter, and we'll talk about nucleic acids and ATP.